Hello, this is Father Michael Nasser coming to you from St. Nicholas Orthodox Church here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, with this week's midweek reflection. And this week I'm reflecting, as a lot of us are, on the ramifications of the Supreme Court decision that came down this past Friday afternoon overturning Roe v. Wade. But I'm not going to talk about the issue or the court case. I'm talking about and reflecting on our response. I have been trying for a while now, actually, sometime when COVID started, to really kind of back away from a lot of the divisiveness that sort of engulfed us. And a lot of it is around and on social media. But that's not the only place it is. It's in conversations around the dinner table and lots of places. Um, and I think, there are times that we are called to say something. We should always say it with love. We don't always do that. We all fall short. I fall short all the time. But if we're going to say something, I think we ought to say it with love. However, what I want to reflect on today is specifically, do we really have to say something? I think that's our assumption. In fact, it's not only should you say it, you should say it loudly, you should say it powerfully, you should say it in the most jarring way you can to get people's attention. And I think there's a mistake about that. I think, again, there are times that we should say it, again, lovingly. But what happened to the value of silence? Especially for us as Christians. There are so many things that Jesus could have spoken out against, and spoken out loudly. And on a few occasions he did. He goes in and he cleans the money changers out of the temple. He accused the Pharisees, the Sadducees, of all their hypocrisy. He did that publicly and probably loudly. But so many things that we would imagine Christ doing, like going out and just righting every wrong, he just didn't do it. One particular thing I want us to reflect on is the time that there was a woman caught in adultery. And the mob comes to get her, and as the law would allow them to, they were going to stone her to death. And one of the gospel accounts says they looked at Jesus, and all he was doing was writing in the sand. Now, we don't know what he was writing. Different guesses about that, about maybe he was writing the sins of all those who were holding stones, about to throw them. We don't really know. What we do know is this: he was silent. Silently writing in the sand as they're about to stone this woman. If we feel like we always have to do something because that's what Jesus calls us to, well, that's not always the case. The silence of Jesus at that moment, he finally did speak up, and he said, who's without sin, cast the first stone. There were a lot of the times where Jesus was quiet, and especially from the cross. Jesus says very little from the cross. In fact, one of the things he does say is, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. He could have lashed out to the disciples that had betrayed him, to the Jews that had turned him over, to Pilate that had authorized his killing. He could have turned loudly against so many people, and especially with the pain that he was going through in his crucifixion. But he silently endures it. And I think he's calling to us today, in this environment, in our country at this time, to at least think about, do we really need to say something? Or is it time really to be silent and to be prayerful? I'm going to say it for the third time. There are times we do need to lovingly speak up, but those aren't every times. And there's certainly not times that we all have to do loudly and so boldly as to be obnoxious about it. The world is craving, although it doesn't know it, it's craving the true love of God. And right now, there are a lot of people who look at the Christians and see the antithesis of what God wants. Some of that is unfair. A lot of it's unfair, but not all of it. Because a lot of Christians have been very loud in condemning non-Christians. But that's not a Christian thing to do. So with all of this push for us to speak out and to say what's on our mind and to say what's right, if we're really called, we really need to do so very carefully, I think a little more sparingly than we have, and maybe with much more love than we have. But maybe it's time to think that it's not for us to say something every time in every situation, but to quietly pray. And pray that the Lord, the Prince of Peace, would come and dwell in our hearts, and the hearts of those who agree with us, and the hearts of those that not only disagree with us, but hate us. We're seeing a growing division. It didn't start over this, but this issue is not going to make it any better. It's going to make it a whole lot worse before it gets better, if it ever does. And as I said last week, it may never get better. It may be just a long, slow decline into darkness. But that doesn't mean, as I said last week, that we have to decline in darkness. Within each of us, the light of Christ is shining. How is it? How is it shining? So brilliantly that everybody can see it? Probably not. It's shining there within us in silence. And I think we ought to all think about it, meditate. Am I called in this environment and many other environments we find ourselves in to sit in humble silence, praying to God and returning to Him who dwells among us in silence? I hope we'll think about this. I hope this challenges you. And if you're going to share it on social media, maybe it's a good way to share something that's a different word than just get out there and be loud and say and speak your piece and say what's on your mind. I think we need to speak forward with a little more silence, ironically. So may God bless you. If you find it helpful, please share it as you see fit. And God willing, we'll see you in next week's video.